Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to today's CA SSO Community Webcast. Today we have Richard Stand with us from IDF Connect, and then Matt Doobie from Product Management with CA, and Herb Melhorn with Product Management with CA. Oh, excuse me, Matt, Product Marketing. And with that, Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you for a brief introduction.
Yeah, hey, this is Herb. Matt's got a little bit of construction going on in his area of the office. So
okay.
Herb. I told him I would take that for him. So first, I'd like to thank everybody for joining the call here today. We have a presentation that will be given by Richard Sand, and I'm happy to give you just a little bit of an introduction to Richard and his capabilities that he'll be talking about, and then turn it over to Richard. Richard is the CEO of a company called IDF Connect and has been working alongside the CA SSO product for a number of years. Originally, I believe, as part of an integrity organization from which the product originally came. He has a deep understanding of the design and the capabilities of the product, and as I say, is the CEO of IDF Connect, who's been a technology partner of CA's for a number of years, has worked with several CA SSO customers, providing a range of different services and capabilities. And today what Richard's going to present is a product called SSO REST. It's a substantial and powerful add-on offering from his company that will enhance the use of CA SSO in a cloud-based environment. So happy to have Richard here, and with those comments, I'll turn it over to you, Richard, and look forward to the rest of the material.
Thank you so much, Herb. My name is Rich Sand. It's a pleasure to be here. As Herb said, I was originally with an integrity organization and have been working with CA SSO for almost 20 years now. And I'm very grateful for CA for organizing this webinar, and I'm looking forward to showing you some interesting things that can be done with CA SSO that go beyond the core of the product, and how SSO REST is creates new use cases and enables new capabilities in CA SSO that really help use some of the new technology and modern use cases that we're encountering at our clients. So with that having said, I'm going to dive right in. My plan for today is to show everyone some slides, and about halfway through the slides, we will do a live demonstration of deploying SSO REST with a cloud-based application and showing how it preserves all of the functionality that we like, the strong access management capabilities that CA SSO has, even though we're running in a cloud environment and that the application is not inside our data center, which really is the heart of what we're getting at. So the product is called SSO REST, and it's called SSO REST because it's exactly what it is. It's a suite of REST services and REST APIs that are provided to answer all the types of questions and answers that a good web access management system needs to be able to ask and answer. And it does so in a very simple and easy to use, easy to consume fashion. So the name is not very original. It's a very generic name, SSO REST. It is what it does. It does what it says. But there are some really important use cases that SSO REST answers, and we divide them into these 5 different types of use cases, some of which are going to be very familiar to you and are use cases that CA SSO is able to, or has been asked to fulfill over the years. where SSO REST adds some additional capabilities and puts some, some new flavors around it. And then there are some use cases which not only are sort of problematic for, really are problematic for any access manager, any of the web access management single sign-on products that are on the market today. And we're going to talk about how SSO REST really adds some competitive advantage to other access management systems that are missing some of these capabilities. So on the left side, you'll see we talk about server-side integration and client-side integration, and these are the use cases where we're developing applications that need to interact with your CA-SSO system. And what we provided are a number of REST capabilities that can be consumed both on the server side and on the client side to do all the things that you might need to do, whether it's logging in a user or validating a session or updating a session cookie, stepping up authentication, asking the question if a user is authorized to 1 or 10 different resources, all in one, single, simple JSON request. And there are, I don't know, maybe 20 or 25 different web services, discrete endpoints that are published by SSO REST. And those endpoints, as I said, they do all of those different things. And there are server-side endpoints that provide a little more detail, and then the client-side endpoints, which are meant to be consumed by whether it's AJAX or mobile, and can do very, very simple operations like here's a SM session cookie. This is how many. The answer is this is how many seconds are left in the session, or this is how many seconds are left until the idle timeout, or given a username and a password, give me an SM session cookie, things like that. And I'm going to skip around a little bit. On the right-hand side are really the most forward-thinking use cases. For example, web access management as a managed service, and that's something that SSO REST enables. In other words, with SSO REST, and we're going to get to the how of it in a little bit in the presentation, but with SSO REST, you can take a SiteMinder policy server infrastructure, all the policy servers, all your directories, your databases for the audit database or whatnot, and put them into a cloud provider of your choice, whether it's Azure or Amazon, and provide the full capabilities of CA-SSO as a managed service without requiring the apps to reside in the same cloud or the same virtual private cloud, or dealing with virtual, with VPNs or any heavy networking. So this is what we consider sort of the natural evolution of this product. But the easiest to consume, and yet one of the biggest challenges that SSO REST solves is this notion of applications in the cloud. Now, what does applications in the cloud really mean? What that means is that the messaging that's been in the market about putting apps into the cloud has been around federate, the need to federate. Like if you're going to take an app that's in my data center, and I've done my CA-SSO integration, and that app is consuming headers and looking to find the username or looking to find other attributes of the user, and you've done all this work to do the app integration. To lift that application and take it out of your data center and drop it onto an EC2 or a Microsoft Azure or some instance, to start using Cloud Foundry, for example, and doing, direct deployment to your platform as a service. Traditionally, what that has meant is undoing or unwinding all of your integration and replacing that integration work that you've done with a more cloud-conducive alternative like a SAML or an OAuth or OpenID. And there's nothing wrong with those techniques. Those are very important. But consider the clients that have been investing in, on-premises web access management systems for years and years and have dozens or hundreds of applications that they have done a tight integration with, where there are CA SSO policies and responses, custom auth schemes, active expressions, all of the integrations that have been done that really harvest the power of CA SSO to unwind that and then replace it with a federation-based approach is a step backwards. It's sort of throwing away technological investment, both in technology and just in time. And it's also a lowering of the enforcement capability and the visibility you get into the access control of those applications. So the moving of applications to the cloud is really the #1 use case and the most important use case today for the product. So this is a common quandary. How do we leverage the investment that we've made already and move these applications into a public cloud but not throw away all the work that we've done? Now, we want a solution so that we can continue to use all the integration work that we've done and all the power of our access management system. But we want it to be easy. It has to be, trivial to take the app and move it into the cloud. It's trivial from the access management standpoint because we know that these apps are going to, the organizations that are undertaking a cloud migration are, they're dealing with many obstacles, whether it's the access to their cloud infrastructure, the databases, the logging, the containerization and orchestra, all the different things that they're dealing with. We want to take the access management part and make it trivial. Make it so that when the CIO asks, okay, what challenges do we have? I'm going down my list of challenges around app migration to the cloud. We want to make sure that access management is checked off as this one we've got, this is easy. So what does that mean? No new firewall ports, no requirement for VPNs between your cloud and your data center, no synchronizing or pushing of employee credentials or user accounts to and from the cloud. And it also means not stepping down, not losing any of the security posture that we've become accustomed to. So, all right, so why is this not just federation? Now, understand that federation is a crucial technology. There is importance, and there are use cases. It's an important tool on our tool belt as an integrator specializing in IAM that, hey, we can take SAML or OAuth or OpenID, and we can take these protocols and we can use them where needed and solve problems with them. But it's important to remember that web access management is more than federation. Web access management is a whole discipline of practices, and SSO REST takes all of those practices that we've kind of come to just accept as they're always there because SSO has solved them for the on-premises apps for so many years. And we make sure that all those capabilities are still fully leveraged in the cloud. And we're going to show you a very simple example where we are going to, take an app and that would traditionally have a SiteMinder web agent, or excuse me, a CASSO web agent in front of it, and we're going to use the SSO REST technology to protect that app, and you're going to see CASSO realm. You can tell I've been with integrity in my past. It's part of my background. You'll see that CASSO realms, rules, policies, auth schemes, responses, everything that you've done and configured for this app are going to be the same, actually. From the standpoint of CASSO, it's not even going to know that SSO REST is in the mix. From the standpoint of CASSO, you're going to see web agents, and you're going to do realms and rules and policies and all of the enforcement capability and all the integration techniques that we've been able to use for the past however many years and continue to use them in new ways. So I mentioned that web access management is a practice. So there's a whole set of activities and controls that we put in place. And we break it down into this diagram with the pretty hexagons to point out what are the really important aspects of web access management that, again, CASSO already solves all of these. So I mentioned, authentication is an easy one. You need to log in, you need to use two-factor auth, you need to step up your authentication under certain circumstances. You may have, RiskMinder in place and you're doing different risk scoring and all the different things involved around the authentication process. You also have access control enforcement. And enforcement is the key word here. One of the security controls that sort of really has taken it on the head, if you will, with the move to cloud and the story sort of articulated in the market that you can replace access management with federation is you lose this ability to do enforcement. Now, whether you've got CASSO using agents or using the secure proxy server, you have a perimeter of enforcement in front of your applications. You've established a perimeter where every single request has been vetted by CASSO before the app gets invoked. And that's really the key message, that the biggest loss, if you will, or the biggest gap as we move apps out of the data center and into cloud providers, the biggest gap is this access control enforcement. We have come to rely on this over the years and almost take it for granted that, sure, of course we have web agents in front of our apps and things like, cross-site scripting attacks or injecting bad characters during the login process. All of those attack patterns that we know are very prevalent are all blocked before the application gets impacted. So, when we live in this world now where, just several months ago there was a huge vulnerability disclosed in struts, for example, where struts, there was also, I think, a Spring Boot had the same vulnerability about serialization of Java objects. And these types of attacks, and you need to worry about, gee, is my application vulnerable to this, or does my application need to be patched or updated, or did my app developers do the proper controls on their inputs to do input validation? Remember that when you have a centralized access control system in place and you're looking at every single one of those requests, you've got a system to monitor and block for attack patterns in a central fashion and to enforce access controls. You know, this person is a user, this person is an administrator, you know, this person is VIP or gold level or whatever. You have that in front of your apps, and there's a huge security benefit of that. And that's what's often overlooked in some of the the conversations today. So this access control enforcement is really key. Single sign-on, that's almost of course it's single sign-on. And I think we all know that there are clients where we've installed SSO where single sign-on wasn't even necessarily their first requirement. Their requirement was more about single credential and that security and access control enforcement. And the single sign-on sometimes is just a benefit. Then there's the idle session and the session duration or max session time to live, boxes 4 or hexes 4 and 5, where we have a centralized session management. And we know that there are times where that's really key, that as you're moving between disparate applications in a single sign-on environment, and you don't want your app to time out when you're on app 1 and your session on app 2 suddenly expires. But remember that centralized session management becomes much more difficult when you do not have a centralized access manager. There are, especially in OpenID Connect, there are some mechanisms to do some session management in a federated fashion, but the more applications you add to your environment, the decentralization of session management gets more and more difficult. I think we've all seen that when we've tried to implement single log-off, and you might have 50 different applications and you want to have one single log-off capability that logs you out of all 50. And if you're in a federated world where there's no centralization of your access manager, you end up going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and just bouncing redirects, bouncing the user from one app to the other during the sign-out process. So the decentralization becomes more and more problematic. And lastly, but certainly not least, is the centralized audit capability, where, again, the way I think about centralized audit, and I'm not telling you anything new, this is what we've become accustomed to. I'm sort of setting the stage here for pointing out where some of the breakdown points are and where SSO REST steps in to preserve all of this. But centralized audit is the very simple ability to know in an audit trail every single activity that a user has undertaken within a given session across all the disparate applications. So if the user is going from app 1 to app 2 to app 3 back to app 1 all in the lifespan of a session, the centralized audit capability lets you know all of the things that that the user has undertaken in that session. And if you've ever tried to work between one of your clients or customers or your infrastructure and a third-party provider to get that visibility into what a user has been doing within a given session, you start looking at logs or traces to try to sniff or to trace what the user has been doing across different apps, and it can be a nightmare. So I want to keep all of these things in mind. So what does it look like when you start going into the cloud world? It's the access control, the session enforcement, and the audit capabilities. These are the areas that, you know, can be really impacted to get apps into the cloud. And so these are the areas where you know, rather than replacing your access management capability and unwinding those integrations and coming up with alternatives, what we've elected to do is make sure that SSO works just as well and preserves all of these things as apps are moved around. So the way we've done this is basically by building from the ground up a different way, a new way of handling the application to access management platform capabilities. And we've also sort of gone back and looked over the years of the web access management work that we've done and looked at the different pain points, like installing web agents and host registration, you know, handling elasticity, handling orchestration, handling metrics, all the different pain points that we've encountered over the years, and addressing them from the ground up in a new way in this new product that's engineered to solve these specific problems. And you know, the criteria were that it's REST-based, that it doesn't introduce new problems, it solves problems. It handles the latency, it's transparent, it's trivial to deploy, and it doesn't require any machinations on the network level. No VPNs, no firewall pinholes, no tunnels. So let's get down into the technical details of this. So where does this thing sit? The core components of SSO REST are really divided fundamentally into two things. We have our SSO REST gateway, and the SSO REST gateway is the component that interfaces to SSO. It speaks, you know, SSO, the SDK, the agent API. It knows how to handle all of the intercommunication between the SSO policy server and your application. So I'm going to see if this annotate. Yeah, they look. No, I don't want to draw a line. I'm trying to use a pen here. Yeah. So here's our SSO REST gateway, and on the back of the SSO gateway here is where you've got your SiteMinder agent API, and it's speaking to your policy servers using the policy server's native language. Then, in your applications, as opposed to having a web agent and the web agent library for IIS or for Apache, we have our SSO REST plugins. So we've got plugins for all of the platforms that you would expect, your Apache, your IIS. We have a plugin for Nginx. We have native app server plugins for WebSphere and for Tomcat and for JBoss/Wildfly, so that you can use any type of container or web server to be the front door to your app as you choose. However, we also have application layer plugins. So for platform as a service, if you're doing a container deploy, if you're doing an app direct deployment to a platform as a service, for example, a Microsoft.NET app where your deployment process is just to FTP the app over to Azure and hit start, or a Cloud Foundry or Amazon Beanstalk, where you're writing a Java web app and taking that WAR file and publishing it, Google App Engine, and you're publishing it, and just it's launched. There's no container that you get to configure. We now have app-level plugins so that you get that enforcement, you get that perimeter, you get that, you maintain that notion that every request is being vetted by CASSO without having to install a DLL or a shared object or a library at a web server layer that you no longer have. The whole point of going to this platform as a service is to eliminate the need for the for you as the customer to need to manage those layers. So our plugin, where's my pen? There it is. So, our plugin here is able to be deployed at the web layer, at the container level, or at the app directly. And that means you can include, it's like including a SiteMinder web agent directly into your application. It's a Maven dependency, or it's an NPM dependency that, you're going to pull the library in. It's a single library or two libraries. It's much lighter weight than a traditional web agent. And the same goes for, other competing platforms like a WebGate or a WebSeal, that instead of sort of being heavier and speaking a proprietary language, this plugin is going to communicate to our gateway over HTTPS. And the payload is always a JSON human-readable payload that is simply an encapsulation of the actual end user's request that came in here. So essentially, you can think of these plugins as being similar architecturally to a web agent proxy, that the plugin itself is asking the question, it's proxying down the road to our gateway the questions that web agents need to ask. Is this resource protected? Are these credentials correct? Is this session cookie valid? Can you please update this session cookie? And oh, by the way, should the user actually be allowed to get into this resource? So the integration at the agent level that you do with CASSO web agents can be replaced with these SSO REST plugins to communicate with our SSO REST gateway over HTTP in a fashion that doesn't add any network dependency about firewalls or VPNs or any of that nonsense, and does it in a way that you can lift your app out of your data center, deploy it into Amazon or EC2 or Google App Engine, and still have the full enforcement capability of your web agent. Because really, what's happened now is your web agent is down here. Your web agent is on the gateway side, and your applications are speaking this much lighter weight HTTP. I got a question in on the chat. I'll take questions. I'll make sure all the questions get answered at the end. So just real quickly, so in addition to the plugin capability, you also have to remember that both the application and the browser or client can also directly talk to the gateway. The gateway's got, as I said, 20-25 different web service endpoints. Some endpoints, really just one endpoint, is made for explicitly for use by the plugins, and all the other endpoints are for direct application integrations of any sort, whether they're client-side or server-side. So these three arrows, you know, the browser AJAX, the application SSO requests, and then plug into gateway, those fundamentally are the three flows that might be in use, and none of them, none of them are dependent upon each other. You know, what you've got is, you know, you could use the plugins, or you could decide not to use the plugins. You could use the AJAX endpoints or the client mobile endpoints, or not. You might just need the application integration endpoint. So you can use any one of these three integration techniques to, you know, power your apps and power your, your access management solution with your cloud apps. So getting just a little more specifically, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time now. I want to get into the demo portion that, but you know, what I'm displaying here in this slide, and everybody who's on the call will get a copy of this deck, or can get a copy of this deck. This is in the public domain, that the plugins are only speaking HTTP, and that it's the gateway that's handling all of the CA/SSO agent traffic. And if you're not using the plugins, we have all the other endpoints, and usually every one of these endpoints has two flavors. We've got an internal flavor and a public flavor where the public ones are very minimalistic. Here's a session cookie, yes, no, is it valid? Here's a URL, is it protected, yes or no? Here's a session cookie, please update it, and here's your update. Whereas on the server side or the internal endpoints, you'll have more information provided for your integration use. You know, here's a session cookie, okay, this is the DN that was in the cookie. This is the start time of the session. This is the the remaining time in the session, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we are now at the demonstration. We're now at the demonstration point of the program, and I'm going to show you how this works on my machine here, just for ease and for seeing the being able to look under the covers. The SSRS that I've got installed here, we also had that installed on our public website, where it's a reference implementation where anybody can always come in and take a look and see that we have SiteMinder functionality between an Azure and an IBM Blue and an Amazon deployed app and a Google App Engine deployed app. I think you all know that the fun part of demonstrating single sign-on is simply that it works, as opposed to, so demonstrating single sign-on, when it comes right down to it, is really showing that everything works without any interaction. So I'm going to show you a couple things under the covers here. First of all, SSO REST has capabilities put into it that we haven't seen before in our access management platforms. So what are some really modern technologies that our customers are asking us to leverage? And one simple example is having a dashboard, having the ease of metrics collections across all the different applications that we've protected. And in SSO REST, we use an ELK stack. So it's Elasticsearch and Kibana dashboards, and there's a metrics collection engine, and it's optional. You don't have to use it to deploy SSO REST, but it's trivial to turn on, and then you have the metrics in the dashboard. And the way that SSO REST is designed is that every interface is pluggable. You know, it embraces not just the notion of APIs, but the modern APIs. So there's an API for metrics collection. So if you want to interface this with a different stack instead of ELK, you can plug in anything. If you want to grab SSO REST and put all of the logs and pull it all into Splunk, that's very easy to do. It's already been done by some of our customers, and we provide a high-level logging capability that works exactly like a SiteMinder agent log, where you're in your agent conf object, you define your different log, log and trace settings, and we also provide a low-level log capability where you can basically plug in any log framework you want. And so you think of a SiteMinder agent, think of a CASSO agent where instead of having the logging and tracing as defined in the ACO or in the agent, you can plug in your own log framework the way that you want the logs collected and formatted and managed, and be able to do that. There are interfaces for caching. So obviously, when you move apps to the cloud, we're trying to reduce the number of round trips between application and your policy server. So we introduced some new types of caching to speed this up and make sure that the latency impact is minimal. So that's an example of something that we've also modularized, and SSO REST ships with a Redis cache implementation, a Redis distributed cache implementation, but you can also replace that for alternative cache mechanisms, of your choice. So we've done a lot of work around the tooling and the management. So this right here. I'm looking at our built-in dashboard that works directly off of Elasticache.
Hey, Richard.
Yes, sir.
Hi, this is Herb. Hey, I think you were trying to show the demonstration. Did you share your demonstration desktop?
Oh my goodness, Herb, thank you. What would I do without you? Yes, I have.
No worries.
Started talking off of the slides and onto my browser, and did not start. So is everybody seeing my browser now?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Herb. I would have just kept going and going like the Energizer Bunny and not realized it. Yeah. So what we're looking at here is the IDF Connect dashboard. It's really a very lightweight console that we've built that kind of just addresses the most pressing types of controls that you might need to see, and it also gives you insight into some of the different things that are configured in the system. None of these are populating because this is my dev VM that doesn't show you a lot of exciting stuff, but basically we have the ability to see metrics off AZs. We can break it down by application or by individual plugin. We can see just some things like the system resources that are available on each gateway, the ACO parameters that are configured and enabled across your various applications, the lifecycle definition. And if any of you are familiar with Maven and some of the development tools that it uses, we modeled SSO REST's lifecycle on a Maven-like architecture. And what that means, and I'm not going to go too far down this particular branch, but all of the processing that SSO REST does is pluggable. So one of the new capabilities that you've got with SSO REST is to actually plug logic right into what would be your agent layer. Now, if you're familiar with the SSO software development kit, you know there's an agent API. So there is a way to write agents using the agent API, but it's a low-level agent. It's a very sort of primitive agent API. It gives you that very raw connectivity between agent and policy server. If you wanted to add your own ACO parameter and tweak the logic of how that ACO parameter is consumed by changing the way that the agent processing actually works, that's a capability there is no SDK for that right now. You can write your own agent or you can use the out-of-the-box agents. There's nothing in between. With SSO REST, we've basically done all the work of writing the agent, and we have specific APIs that allow you to plug in your own ACO parameters and plug in your own processors for those ACO parameters to augment or replace the out-of-the-box functionality, and it gives you some really powerful capabilities. Okay, I don't think I have time to show you those in more detail, so let me just make sure I hit all the high-level touch points. This is the dashboard. There's also a Swagger UI, if you're familiar with Swagger, that will tell you all of the different services that are published by the gateway. You can see the whole slew of them here. The header utilities, which are if there is a front-end web agent. There are the SSO ones. These are all the internal endpoints that are meant to be used on a server-to-server fashion that sort of give you more details. And then there's the public endpoints that are used for AJAX or for mobile apps. And then there are the gateway endpoints, which are used by the plugins. And I'm going to show you a little bit about some of those gateway endpoints next. So, as an example, I just set up a new website on my local IIS box. Now, this procedure here is no different at all than putting an application onto Microsoft Azure in their platform, in their application container and FTPing your application over. So in this case, I've called my application ASPX test, and I can browse to that application, IDFC Dev 2, it's on port 81, ASPX test. Okay, so I'm now looking at this .NET application. I'm hitting an unprotected resource, and let's take a look. Okay, I've got a couple of my SiteMinder headers like I would expect. A transaction ID, auth type is not protected. But the neat thing about this application is that there's no web agent. So there is nothing defined, on any of these levels in IIS for this app. This is just a .NET app. So if we were to deploy this app onto Microsoft's, platform as a service, which I kind of have a window open here to my, using my Azure credentials, you can literally just take this application and FTP it over to your Azure instance, and there's nothing to install. Now, looking under the covers a little bit, let's take a look at what this application actually has configured. So here's my app folder, which I said you would just FTP this over to Azure. And in its bin folder, it has 4 libraries, and one of them is for the app. So I've got my app DLL, and then I've got the SSOREST plugin. The SSOREST plugin is these 3 single libraries. There's the SSOREST module itself, there's a logging DLL, and the JSON parser. So for I'm fond of saying that, we take our plugin and make it a single library. Okay, sometimes it's one library, sometimes it's 2 or 3, to make sure that we've got all the functionality. But it doesn't pull in any other third-party dependencies. Everything is self-contained within these libraries. And you also have, on the Azure side, the ability to do, global deployment of libraries to make them available to all apps. So then we've got our typical .NET web config, and honestly, on the Java side, it's nearly identical. It's just 2 different ways to get to the same goal, where in our web application, we've also added that we need to use the SSRS plugin. So then we've got the SSRS plugin specific configuration. And there are very few parameters here because this needs to be deployed with your apps. So again, if you're thinking about SiteMinder agent configuration objects, remember that most of that logic has been moved to the gateway side, so that the logic on the plugin side is very, very minimal. So what's the logic here? Well, first of all, we have the URL of our actual SSRS gateway. So I've got my gateway running here locally. It's got full sort of trace level going on. I've got it running in a Tomcat. The gateway will run in any application container or any Java app. The gateway is Java, so it will run in any Java app container. We ship it pre-configured for the Tomcat. Some things that it allows you to do, mainly for troubleshooting, you can send all of your traffic through a reverse proxy. There's a trust store for the, I don't have SSL enabled here on my local box, but there's a trust store for the SSL. There are a couple of ignores. These are identical to the ACO parameters. There's an ignore extensions, and there's an ignore host, and there's an ignore URL, which we allow those configuration parameters to be created on the plugin side as well as on the gateway side as a mechanism for minimizing traffic. And then there is a handshake, a plugin ID and a secret key. For demo purposes, the key is in clear text, but there's an encrypted form for these that just tell the plugin how to communicate to the gateway. And honestly, you don't necessarily even need to use these. It's an added layer to make sure that the gateway is throwing away traffic that doesn't come from known plugins. But I want to show you what happens when you don't have these parameters configured at the beginning. Because in modern DevOps, you want to build your app and deploy it first, and then go into the configuration. One of the challenges with web agents is that we've got the need to do setup and configuration. You need to do your host registration. You need to interface with your IAM team to get things set up. And the way that we've done it here is making sure that your different app teams can really stand on their own and not need to have help from the security team to get started. So if I disable my plugin here, so here's my application, but I have no plugin configuration. And so what happens in that case is the plugin is going to intercept the request and say, hey, this is a new app. You need to self-register, or self-register from the app owner standpoint, your plugin ID, so that we can create, this is like host registration for plugins, but we've made a web GUI from it. So all you need to do is deploy your app to Azure or to EC2, you hit publish, and then you'll get prompted to register your plugin. Now, my final thought on this topic is that where there's a web page, there's a web service. So in addition to having the web GUI to allow app teams to register their own plugins, you can orchestrate this so that it's a web service call to define plugins as you're deploying new apps or scaling up new apps, putting them out into the cloud, and you get to use all your orchestration tools. So I've actually showed you the most of what I wanted to show you. I'm a little bit behind on the time because we're approaching the top of the hour, but I want to get to the chat question and be able to do the Q&A. So I'm going to conclude just with these parting thoughts, and then I'll take a couple questions. So I'm just going to jump ahead. This is just, you know, these slides, which everybody can get access to. You should be interested in this technology if you have CA/SSO and are moving to the cloud, and then all the other touch points that I've touched on, platforms that we support, web servers, app platforms. We're very happy that we're an NGINX certified partner, or a certified module. So if you're trying to use NGINX with CA/SSO, we are a official supported NGINX Plus plugin. But the parting thoughts are: move to the cloud. No new network moving parts. No VPNs, firewall holes, tunnels. That your applications can use our plugins, your AJAX and mobile apps can use the web services, your server-side apps can talk directly to your CA/SSO infrastructure. You can use any one of these three techniques. None of them are reliant upon each other. There's metrics, there's caching, there's orchestration, there's self-service for app teams. There's some really powerful stuff. I'm just going to mention this in one sentence and let everybody think about it. We provide a mechanism where ACO parameters can be applied to individual realms instead of having ACO parameters cover the whole app or whole server. So that's kind of neat. Fine-grained audit and tracing, the Swagger UI. We also have a set of test pages that are shipped with SSO REST to test all the different features and functionality. And I'm going to conclude with that because we're just squeaking into the top of the hour. And again, I will be very happy to talk with anybody further about any of the details about what's in the product. So a couple questions I received. Nishant asked, does it act similar to the traditional agent in abstracting the interactions with the policy server without having to do tight integration for auth-N, auth-Z? And the answer is yes. What will happen is, if you're using our plugins to swap out for a web agent, you will have the exact same functionality. So the application will not see any difference. You're going to have the same headers, the same cookies. If you're doing, SM identity with anonymous auth, or SM data, which is, for storing your credentials, or whatever agent type, multi-cookie domain, credential collection. Everything works. We have put all the functionality into SSO REST so that there's no step backwards. So yes, when you replace your agents with SSO REST plugins, you get the full complement of capabilities that CA/SSO offers. You're not taking any steps backwards. Kaladar asks, is there a need for the gateway when the JSON request being sent by the plugin? Can it go directly to CA/SSO 12.8? No, you still need the SSO REST gateway. CA in 12.8, or even earlier, but especially in 12.8, has JSON off-N, off-Z APIs, and those are provided by CA in the through the CA proxy server, and are different. There are different APIs. They work a little bit differently and are not, at the JSON level. They're not compatible with these services provided by SSO REST. So there's no problem using both. You can absolutely use the 12.8 REST APIs to do, programmatic stuff. Basically, that would sit at the same level as doing, the mobile or the AJAX calls. There are just two different alternatives. You can use the 12.8 REST, JSON calls, or you can use SSO REST. But the SSO REST plugins must have an SSO REST gateway. Let's see. I think we're just about done. Sridhar asks, can we get a link to the documentation? Yes, absolutely. Chris Hackett has already said that the presentation, the recording, and the deck will all be shared after the call, or shared by Chris, in the subsequent days. Real quick, I see Jeff Minder asks, are you able to share info on any large deployments? You know how tricky it is getting reference customers even for CA SSO, but the answer is yes, we have them. This is in production in some really, really big enterprises taking a really large volume of traffic. So from a production readiness standpoint and a scalability standpoint, this has all been vetted. And our reference customers, while I wish I could publish their names on our website, are open to taking phone calls as references. And we have references in finance, in e-com, and in higher education. So we're very happy to set up reference calls as necessary. The software, your customers or you can engage with IDF Connect to purchase SSO REST, or some of the CA partners like Core Blocks and Simeo that are CA resellers are also set up to resell SSO REST. So those are some of your options as far as engagement.
Well, thank you, Richard. I think we're a few minutes past, so in the interest of everyone's time. It was a great presentation. I think we might have lost Herb here, but thank you, and thank you everyone for attending. And as Richard mentioned, I did respond to the one question about the presentation. We will be posting the presentation, copy of the presentation, and the recording probably tomorrow sometime up to the community site. And everyone who attended here today will also receive an email that will have a link to the presentation and to the recording. So any final thoughts here, Richard?
No, just want to echo again, Chris, you did a terrific job helping pull this off. I really appreciate this, and really I'm glad that everyone attended, and I'm glad that the CA pulled it together.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, Richard. Thank you, everyone, for participating today, and have a great rest of your day.
Take care. Bye-bye.